Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Natalia Moczulska and this is the news. According to the Kremlin, there is no war in Ukraine. There is a special military operation. But yesterday, Putin signed a decree on the introduction of martial law in Russia. At the moment, martial law is only in effect in the Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. Apart from propaganda, will calling the war a war change anything? And what does Putin even need this decree for? 2 days ago, Russian services reported a terrorist attack that allegedly took place in the Bryansk region, located right on the border with Ukraine. The Kremlin accused Ukraine of conducting a border incursion in Bryansk Oblast, Russia. Ukrainian officials denied the Kremlin's accusations and claimed that Russian officials might be facing problems with increasing partisan activity in Russia. Regime agencies reported a group of dozens of servicemen allegedly crossed from Ukraine into Russia. The Ukrainian soldiers were supposed to shoot at civilians, including children, and take hostages. Of course, this act of terror will be investigated and measures will be taken to prevent such incidents in the future. As it turned out, however, the Russian Volunteer Corps claimed responsibility for the attack. The saboteur unit consists of Russians who decided to fight against Putin. Well, friends, it happened. The Russian Volunteer Corps crossed the border of the Russian Federation. The proof of this is behind my back. Now the time has come for the citizens of Russia to understand that they are not slaves. Begin to revolt. Fight back.
Теперь пришло время обычным гражданам России понять, что они не рабы. Поднимайте бунт, сражайтесь.
It's no coincidence that the day after the incident, the leader of the Kremlin regime signed a decree that allows the introduction of top-down management in companies that violate the rules of state defense during martial law. This war has indeed been moving to Russian territory for some time. By the way, it was Russia itself that imported it. Decrees are being introduced to reach for funds, but this will not solve the problem. This problem will grow until it finally leads to Putin's downfall. Currently, martial law is in effect in Russian-occupied Ukrainian lands. Parts of the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions are being referred to. We know that Putin is living the besieged fortress syndrome, fearing the West and doing everything to be prepared to wage a large-scale war. Putin is aware that he is losing the war with Ukraine, and hostilities could spill over into the territory of the Russian Federation at any time. Yesterday, the Kremlin spokesman was asked by journalists about the possibility of imposing martial law in Russia in connection with the attacks in the Bryansk region. Peskov concluded that no decisions had been made. Day 374 of the war in Ukraine. Currently, there is no breakthrough on the front, although in the Bakhmut region, Russia is gaining the upper hand. According to the Americans, every day the Russian military fires an average of more than 23,000 artillery shells. But according to American experts, what matters on the battlefield nowadays is the precision of weapons, and the war is won by whoever produces those weapons as quickly as possible. If only it were so simple that on the one hand, we have the military potential of Russia, and on the other, all the forces of the West. The Ukrainian defense of Bakhmut is under increasing pressure from Russian troops and Wagner Group units. Intense fighting is taking place in and around the city. It is becoming increasingly difficult to deliver supplies to the defenders. Ukrainians are exposed to attacks from 3 directions. Kiev is reinforcing the defense lines with elite units. The Ukrainian command asserts a high commitment of special troops to defend the city. If the Ukrainian military command deems it necessary to withdraw troops from Bakhmut, it is likely to conduct a limited and controlled withdrawal from particularly difficult sectors east of Bakhmut. The number of victims of Russian shelling of an apartment building in Zaporizhia has risen to 10. There were 11 survivors, among them a pregnant woman. Residents of Kherson, which was liberated 4 months ago, recall a time when the city was occupied by the Russians. When we asked for diapers for our born daughter, the Russians said we would only get them if we showed a Russian birth certificate. We refused. Why? We simply said that the daughter was born in Ukraine and is Ukrainian, not Russian. The Russians ran such a propaganda campaign that Russia would always be here. Some thought they could just wait it out. FSB officers threatened that if families did not receive Russian documents, they would face problems and could be deported. There have been cases like this. A group of 55 Ukrainian soldiers has begun training on Leopard 2A4 tanks in Spain. The Ukrainian tank drivers, along with mechanics, arrived for training in the second half of February. The Spanish army wants to transfer transfer 4 to 6 Leopards to Ukraine. Poland has already handed over 4 of the announced 14 German-made machines. U.S. President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met yesterday in the Oval Office of the White House. Biden thanked Scholz for the military and moral support provided to Ukraine.
And I want to thank you, Olaf, for your strong and steady leadership. I mean that sincerely. It's made a world of difference. And together, we made good on our promise. You stepped up to provide critical military support. And, you know, I would argue that beyond your military support, the moral support you gave to the Ukrainians has been profound.
On Thursday, Olaf Scholz called on China to pressure Moscow to withdraw Russian troops and for Beijing not to supply weapons to the Russian aggressor.
At this time, I think it is very important that we give the message that we will continue to do so as long as it takes and as long as it is necessary, and that we are ready also for staying with the Ukrainians as long as it is necessary.
According to the commander of NATO forces in Europe, General Christopher Cavoli, the war in Ukraine has entered a new phase. The precision of weapons now counts on the battlefield, and the war can be won by the side that produces and delivers them to the front more quickly. In early February, the Belarusian regime sentenced Andrei Poczobut to 8 years in a maximum security penal colony. And yesterday, a 10-year sentence was announced for Ales Białacki. How should Poland deal with Lukashenko? Should Poland close all border crossings with Belarus? What do Polish people think about such a solution? In a poll published today, internet users were asked, in your opinion, should Poland close all crossings in Poland's border with Belarus? To such a question, more than 54% of respondents answered yes, almost 28.5% no, and 17.5% I have no opinion. The survey was conducted by the SW Research Agency for the RP.pl portal, and 800 randomly selected adult Poles took part. The results of the poll show that more than half of Polish people want the border with Belarus closed. To recall, the Kuźnica border crossing was closed in November 2021 due to the migration crisis, and on February 10th of the current year, the border in Bobrowniki was closed. This happened after a Belarusian court sentenced Andrzej Poczobut, a journalist and activist of the Polish minority in Belarus, to 8 years in prison. Currently, of the road crossings on the Polish-Belarusian border, only 2 remain open, in Terespol and in nearby Kukuryki. However, on February 10th, at a summit in Brussels, Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki announced that Poland does not rule out closing the rest of its border crossings with Belarus. The sacred oil, which will be used to anoint King Charles III at his coronation on May 6th, was consecrated in Jerusalem yesterday during a ceremony in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. His Beatitude Theophilos III, the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem, and the city's Anglican Archbishop Hosam Naum consecrated the chrism oil.
We had this special service for the sanctification of the holy oil here in the heart of Jerusalem, that is to say, in the Holy Sepulchre, in the very tomb of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is a sign of the connection and the link of the royal family of the United Kingdom, and more specifically of His Majesty King Charles with the Holy Land and, of course, the holy city of Jerusalem, and more specifically with the very part of the earth that has been sanctified and blessed by the redeeming blood of our Lord Jesus Christ.
The oil, perfumed with sesame, rose, jasmine, cinnamon, neroli benzoin, and orange blossom, is based on that used for the coronation of the late Queen Elizabeth 70 years ago, and a formula used for hundreds of years, Buckingham Palace said. The oil will be used to anoint Charles III when he and his wife Camilla are crowned at London's Westminster Abbey on May 6th, in what is considered the most sacred part of the solemn ceremony. Traditionally, the oil is poured from an ampulla onto the coronation spoon, and then the sovereign is anointed on their hands, breast, and head. The newly consecrated oil was made using olives harvested from 2 groves on the Mount of Olives at the Monastery of the Ascension and the Monastery of Mary Magdalene, the burial place of Charles's grandmother, Princess Alice of Greece.
There is that family connection of his grandmother being buried at St. Mary's Church on the Mount of Olives. It's a very significant focal point also in the life of the royal family, which adds an important connection to that. And also we have the Anglican Communion Church of England Greek Orthodox connection. So what has been happening today, I think there is that thread that the consecration of the oil for the enthronement and the coronation brings about something of a deep and profound meaning, both to King Charles, to the church in Jerusalem, to the Holy Land.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please stay tuned for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and some of our other programs. But for me, it's have a wonderful evening.